I didn't plan on becoming someone who signs up to test experimental drugs. It wasn't something I grew up thinking about, or even something I joked about with friends. It just happened, slowly, the way most bad decisions do. At the time, I was behind on rent, not dangerously behind, not yet, but close enough that it stayed on my mind all day. I'd wake up thinking about it, go to sleep doing the same math over and over again. What I could delay, what I could ignore, what I could pretend wasn't urgent yet. It wasn't panic. It was quieter than that, more constant. I still had a job, but it wasn't enough. Hours had been cut without warning, and every shift felt like it barely made a difference. Bills didn't stop coming just because my income did. They stacked up, calmly, like they had all the time in the world. Eventually, I started looking for something else, anything temporary, something that could bridge the gap long enough for things to stabilize. That's when I started seeing the ads. They weren't everywhere at first, just small things, easy to scroll past, clinical trials, short-term participation, high compensation, the kind of listings that sound too convenient to be real, but not unrealistic enough to dismiss completely. I ignored them, at least in the beginning. It felt like the kind of thing other people did, people who were more desperate or more reckless, not me. I told myself I had other options, but the numbers kept coming back. Every time I saw one, I paused a little longer, read a little more, compared the payment to what I was currently making, compared the time commitment to how long it would take me to earn the same amount somewhere else. It didn't match. That was the problem. Nothing else matched. After a few days, curiosity stopped feeling like curiosity. It started feeling like a solution. I clicked on one of the listings. The website looked clean, professional. No obvious signs that anything was wrong. They explained the process in simple terms: screening, short stay, monitoring. Compensation clearly listed. No vague promises, no hidden conditions. It felt structured, safe even. I told myself that mattered. The application was easy, basic information, medical history, a few questions about lifestyle. Nothing invasive, nothing that made me hesitate. They responded quickly, faster than I expected. Within a day, I had a phone interview scheduled. The call itself was short. Direct questions, clear answers. No pressure, no attempt to convince me. If anything, it felt like they were just confirming I qualified. That made it easier. By the time they offered me a spot, the decision didn't feel complicated anymore. It felt logical. A few days in a controlled environment, medical supervision, enough money to cover everything I was worried about, and then some. I told myself it was temporary. Just one trial. That was the plan. I remember sitting in my apartment the night before I left, going over everything again. The risks, the benefits, the details they had provided, trying to find something that didn't add up. But everything seemed reasonable. That was the word I kept coming back to, reasonable. I checked my bank account one more time. That settled it. The next morning, I packed light, just the basics, clothes, phone charger, a few things to pass the time. Nothing that suggested I'd be gone long, because I didn't think I would be. On the way there, everything felt normal. Traffic moved the way it should. People went about their day like nothing unusual was happening. And I remember thinking, this is probably the easiest decision I've made in a while. Looking back, that's the part that stays with me. Not the money, not the situation, just how easy it felt. Because now, I can't tell if it was ever really a choice, or if I had already started saying yes long before I realized it. The car dropped me off further out than I expected. I had assumed the facility would be somewhere closer to the city, attached to a hospital maybe, or part of a larger research complex. Instead, the drive took longer than it should have, past traffic, past shops, past anything that looked like it belonged to people. By the time we slowed down, the road was mostly empty. The building didn't stand out. That was the first thing I noticed. It wasn't hidden, but it didn't try to be seen either. A low, rectangular structure. Dark windows, no signage, no company name, no indication of what it was supposed to be. If I hadn't known the address, I would have driven past it. The driver didn't say anything when I got out. He just waited until I stepped away from the car before pulling off, leaving the place quieter than it had been a moment before. I stood there for a second, looking at the building, trying to decide if it matched what I had expected. It didn't. But it didn't look wrong either. Just incomplete. The front door opened before I could think about it any longer. A man stepped out, plain clothes, neutral expression. He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask my name, just gave a small nod and gestured for me to come inside. I followed. The difference between outside and inside was immediate. The air felt controlled, not cold, not warm, just consistent in a way that didn't change as I stepped further in. The floors were clean enough to reflect the overhead lights slightly. Everything was some variation of white or gray. It looked professional. But it didn't feel active. There was no background noise, no distant conversations, no movement beyond what was directly in front of me. Even my footsteps sounded softer than they should have. The man led me down a hallway without speaking. That's when I noticed the cameras, and they weren't hidden. Small, dark domes spaced along the ceiling, angled in different directions. Some pointed at doors. Others faced sections of the wall that didn't seem important. At one point, I counted 3 covering the same stretch of hallway. That felt unnecessary. We passed several doors, all identical, no windows, no labels, just smooth surfaces and small keycard panels beside each one. I tried to listen for anything behind them. Nothing. No voices, no movement, just the same quiet. We reached a reception area. It looked more familiar. A desk, a few chairs, a computer terminal. A woman sat behind the desk, typing something without looking up. When she finally did, her expression didn't change much. "Name," she said. I told her. She checked something on the screen, then nodded slightly, like I had matched whatever she was expecting. "Have a seat." That was it. No introduction, no explanation. I sat down. The man who had brought me in left without saying anything. The silence settled again. I looked around. The walls were bare, no posters, no signs. Nothing that explained what they actually did there. Even the desk looked minimal, just the computer and a small stack of papers. It felt less like a workplace and more like a space designed to remove anything unnecessary. Time passed, or at least it felt like it did. I checked my phone. No signal. That made sense, given the location. Still, it felt intentional. I glanced around again, looking for something else to ground myself. That's when I noticed it. There were no clocks. Not on the walls. Not on the desk. Not anywhere I could see. It wasn't something I would normally think about. But in a place like that, it stood out more than anything else. Because without a clock, there was no easy way to track how long I had been sitting there, or how long I would be. I put my phone back in my pocket and leaned back in the chair. The quiet felt heavier now, not uncomfortable, just complete, like it didn't expect to be interrupted. After a while, I noticed something else, a small movement at the edge of my vision. Not a person, just a shift. Like one of the lights flickered slightly, then steadied. I looked directly at it. Nothing. Everything was normal. I sat there a little longer, letting the silence settle again. And for the first time since arriving, I had a quiet thought I couldn't ignore. Not that something was wrong, just that whatever this place was, it didn't feel like it was meant to be easy to leave. They didn't give it to me with the contract. That's what made it stand out. I had already signed everything by the time they handed it over. Pages of dense text, technical language, enough disclaimers to make it feel legitimate. It all blurred together after a while. Standard risks, monitored conditions, voluntary participation. Nothing that felt unusual. So when the staff member pulled out a single sheet of paper just as I was about to leave the room, it felt separate. "Keep this with you," he said. No explanation. He placed it on the table and stepped back. Like it wasn't part of the same process. I picked it up. The paper was plain. No logo, no official header, just a title centered at the top. Post-administration behavioral guidelines. I frowned slightly. That wasn't the kind of wording I expected. I started reading. 1. If you hear your name called twice in succession, do not respond to the second instance. I paused. Read it again. It didn't sound like medical advice. There was no explanation attached, no context, just a direct instruction. I moved to the next one. 2. Avoid unnecessary conversation between 1 and 3 in the morning. If communication is required, keep responses brief. Do not repeat yourself. That felt more structured, but still off. Why that specific time? Why limit repetition? I glanced up at the staff member, expecting him to clarify. He didn't. He was organizing the rest of the paperwork, not even looking at me. I looked back down. 3. If you observe an individual in your room who was not present when you entered, do not acknowledge them. Remain still until they leave or are no longer visible. I stopped completely. The wording wasn't cautious. It wasn't hypothetical. It assumed the situation would happen. I felt a slight tension in my chest, but I pushed it aside. There had to be an explanation, some kind of psychological test, a way to measure responses under controlled conditions. That made sense. It had to. I kept reading. 4. Do not rely on reflections for confirmation of movement or presence. Limit exposure to reflective surfaces when possible. Reflections? For what? I shifted slightly in my chair. The room around me felt quieter. Not physically, just more noticeable. 5. If you notice a discrepancy between your memory and recorded time, trust the recorded time. Do not attempt to reconstruct missing intervals. That line connected directly to something in the contract. Perceptual inconsistencies. But this felt more specific, more direct. Like it wasn't just a possibility. It was expected. 6. If a staff member repeats the same instruction twice in the same tone, follow it immediately. Do not ask for clarification. Why would they repeat instructions? And why would it matter how it sounded? 7. If you become aware of a rule after violating it, do not attempt to correct your behavior retroactively. Continue forward. That one felt different, less about action, more about timing, like the moment you realized something mattered was already too late. I exhaled slowly. There was a pattern forming now. Each rule didn't just tell me what to do. Yeah, it implied something had already gone wrong. I reached the bottom of the page. One final line, separated slightly from the rest. Failure to follow these guidelines may result in outcomes not covered under standard adverse reaction protocols. I stared at that for a few seconds. The wording was careful, too careful, not covered. That didn't sound like side effects. It sounded like exceptions. I looked up again. "What exactly are these for?" I asked. The staff member didn't hesitate. "Precautionary measures," he said. "For what?" He met my eyes briefly. "For variables that may arise during the trial." That didn't explain anything. It just replaced one vague answer with another. I looked back at the paper. The rules didn't feel like precautions. They felt like instructions, specific, deliberate, necessary. I folded the sheet once, then again, slipped it into my pocket. It felt lighter than it should have, like something that didn't carry its own weight. As I stood to leave, the room felt different than before. Not wrong, just more aware. Like something had shifted slightly after I read it. I stepped into the hallway again, the same quiet stretching out in both directions. My hand brushed against the folded paper in my pocket. Still there, still real. But for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't supposed to understand those rules yet. I was just supposed to remember them, because sooner or later, they were going to make sense on their own. The next morning didn't feel like morning. There was no natural light, no change in the air, nothing that marked time passing the way it normally would. Just a soft knock on the door, followed by my name, spoken once, clear, controlled. Close enough that I was already awake by the time I realized I hadn't heard anyone approach. I sat up slowly. For a second, I wasn't sure how long I'd been asleep. It didn't feel like a full night, but it didn't feel short either. Just interrupted. Another knock. "Please prepare for administration." Same tone, same delivery. I got up without answering. The hallway outside looked exactly the same as before. Same lighting, same stillness, the same sense that everything was already in place before I stepped into it. A staff member stood a few feet away, waiting. He nodded once and turned. I followed. I tried to track the path this time. Count steps, notice turns, anything that would help me understand the layout. But it didn't hold. The spacing between doors didn't stay consistent long enough to map. Every time I thought I had it, something shifted slightly out of place. We reached a larger room. This one felt different, brighter, more clinical. Equipment lined the walls. Monitors, trays, cables arranged with careful precision. It looked closer to what I had expected when I signed up. That helped. A little. There were 2 other participants already inside, seated in separate chairs. A nurse moved between them, checking readings, adjusting something on a tablet. Another staff member stood near the wall, watching without saying anything. No one spoke. I was guided to an empty chair. Sit. I did. The process was routine. A cuff around my arm, a sensor on my finger, the kind of steps that felt familiar enough to keep things grounded. The nurse approached. No introduction, just movement, efficient, controlled. She checked my pulse, noted something down, then reached for a tray beside her. On it was a syringe, clear liquid, no label. "This will be administered intravenously," she said. Her voice was calm, neutral, not reassuring, just informative. I nodded slightly. She prepared my arm. I looked away. Then I noticed something, a clock, mounted on the wall across the room. the first one I had seen since arriving. The second hand moved smoothly. No ticking, no pauses, just continuous motion. For some reason, I found myself watching it. "Please remain still," she said. The needle went in, clean, minimal discomfort. I felt the pressure first. Not pain, just a subtle awareness of something entering my system. Cool, I kept my eyes on the clock. 10 seconds. 20, 30. Nothing, no dizziness, no shift, just the same room, the same silence. I exhaled slowly. The nurse removed the needle and placed a bandage over the spot. Administration complete. That was it. No explanation of what would happen next. No warning. Just done. I sat there, waiting. The others did the same. The room stayed quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt focused, like something had started, even if nothing had changed yet. I became more aware of my body, heartbeat steady, breathing normal. Maybe a slight pressure behind my eyes, faint, easy to ignore. Across from me, one of the participants shifted slightly in his chair. The nurse glanced at him, then at the clock. Always the clock. I followed her gaze. The second hand moved, smooth, continuous. But for a moment, I thought it slowed, just slightly. I blinked, looked again. It was normal, probably. I looked away. "Any changes?" the nurse asked. "No," I said. The others answered the same. She nodded, noted something down. Time passed, or at least it felt like it did. At some point, I became aware of a sound. Not loud, just present, like something shifting in the air. I tilted my head slightly, tried to focus on it. Nothing, just silence. I let it go. Then it happened again, closer this time. Not louder, just nearer, like it had moved. I resisted the urge to turn. There was no reason to. It was probably nothing. Ventilation, equipment, something explainable. "Focus forward," the nurse said. I hadn't realized I had started looking around. I nodded, fixed my gaze ahead. The room looked the same, but the longer I stared, the more it felt like something wasn't. Not wrong, just waiting. And for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that the injection wasn't the important part. The waiting was. It didn't happen right away. For a while, everything stayed the same. The room, the people, the quiet. Nothing changed in a way I could point to. If anything, it felt slower. Like time had stretched just enough to make every second more noticeable. I kept my eyes forward. That part felt important. The nurse moved between us, checking readings, writing things down without saying much. The other participants stayed quiet, each of us focused on ourselves in that same controlled way. I tried to do the same, breathe normally, sit still, wait. The pressure behind my eyes was still there, faint, steady, easy to ignore if I didn't focus on it. So I didn't. I let my attention settle on the table in front of me, the edge, the surface, the way the light reflected off it, something simple, something stable. Time passed, or something like it. Then I heard it, my name, clear, close, right behind me. I froze. The sound wasn't distorted. It didn't echo or stretch or carry in a strange way. It sounded exactly like it should. Natural, familiar, spoken at a normal volume. For a second, I thought it was one of the staff. Maybe someone had stepped closer without me noticing. That made sense. It was the easiest explanation. I almost turned. Almost. Then I remembered the paper, the rules. If you hear your name called twice in succession, do not respond to the second instance. I stayed still, didn't turn, didn't speak, just waited. A few seconds passed. Nothing happened. The room stayed quiet. No footsteps, no movement behind me. I exhaled slowly. Maybe I had imagined it. The pressure behind my eyes shifted slightly, then settled again. I kept my focus forward, tried to let the moment pass. Then I heard it again. My name. Same voice, same tone. But something about it was slightly off. Not enough to explain, just enough to feel wrong. I felt my chest tighten. Not fear, recognition. This was it. This was the rule. I didn't move, didn't respond, didn't acknowledge it in any way. The silence stretched, longer this time, like something was waiting for a reaction. I kept my breathing steady, controlled, normal. A few seconds passed. Then, nothing. No third call, no movement. The pressure behind my eyes eased slightly. The air in the room felt lighter again, like something had stopped. I swallowed slowly, kept my eyes forward. The nurse didn't react, didn't look up. Nothing in the room suggested anything had happened at all. I glanced slightly to the side. The other participants looked the same. No one seemed to have noticed, or if they had, they weren't showing it. I sat there for a moment longer, letting everything settle, trying to find a way to explain it. Maybe it had been someone else's name. Maybe it just sounded like mine. Maybe that thought didn't hold, because I knew what I had heard, and I knew it had happened twice, exactly the way the rule described. I shifted slightly in my seat. The chair made a soft sound against the floor. Normal. Everything felt normal again. Too normal. I looked at the table, the edge, the surface. Something solid. Something that didn't change. But the feeling didn't go away. That quiet awareness. Because the moment hadn't just happened. It had ended. Like something had been waiting. And then stopped when I didn't respond. I exhaled slowly, my focus narrowing without me meaning to. Because now, the rules didn't feel strange anymore. They felt specific. And if that moment had followed the rule exactly, then it wasn't a coincidence. It was something that had been expected, something that had been prepared for, and something that had just confirmed itself to me for the first time. I sat there, staring forward, listening to the same quiet room that hadn't changed at all. But now, it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like something had been there and had just decided to leave. They moved me to the observation room not long after. There wasn't any announcement, just a quiet instruction to stand, followed by a different staff member guiding me out of the administration area. The others stayed behind. No one spoke as I left. The hallway felt familiar now, not normal, just easier to move through. Like my body had started adjusting to something my mind hadn't caught up with yet. The room they brought me to was the same as before. Small, clean, controlled. A bed, a chair, a narrow table, no windows, no sound beyond that low, constant hum that seemed to exist everywhere in the building. "Remain here," the staff member said. Same tone, same delivery. Then he left. The door closed quietly behind him. The silence settled immediately. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes move across the room. Everything looked exactly the same as I remembered. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. I sat on the edge of the bed, reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded paper. The rules. I unfolded it slowly, read through them again. This time, they didn't feel strange. They felt relevant, real. I paused at the third one. If you observe an individual in your room who was not present when you entered, do not acknowledge them. I looked up. The room was empty. Of course it was. I exhaled quietly and folded the paper again, slipped it back into my pocket. No reason to focus on that. Not yet. I leaned back against the wall. The quiet felt deeper here, more complete. In the other areas, there had at least been movement, staff, equipment, something to break the stillness. Here, there was nothing. Just that low hum. Constant. Unchanging. Time passed, or something like it. I lay down slowly, staring at the ceiling. The light above me didn't flicker, didn't change. It stayed exactly the same. Sleep came in fragments, not full rest, just short gaps where my thoughts drifted, then snapped back into place. In between, I noticed things, small shifts, a sound that didn't belong, the faint feeling that something had moved, even though nothing should have. Each time, I told myself the same thing. Nothing's there. That was enough. For a while. At some point, I opened my eyes again. The room looked the same, but something felt different. Not visually, just present. Like the space wasn't empty anymore. I didn't move, didn't sit up, just let my eyes adjust. Slowly, carefully. That's when I saw it, a figure, standing near the corner of the room, still, completely still. I felt my body tense, but I didn't react, didn't speak, didn't acknowledge it. The rule. I focused on the ceiling instead, letting my peripheral vision confirm what I already knew. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of that. The figure didn't move, didn't shift, but I could feel it. Not physically, just aware. Like it knew I had seen it and was waiting for something. I kept my breathing steady, slow, controlled, normal. Seconds passed, or longer. I didn't try to count. Then, a shift. I didn't see it move, but I felt the difference. The air changed slightly. Lighter. Less occupied. I waited a few seconds, then slowly turned my eyes toward the corner. Empty. Nothing there. I sat up carefully, looked around the room. Everything was exactly as it had been before. Bed, chair, table. No sign that anything had been there at all. I exhaled slowly, but the feeling didn't leave. It stayed, faint, lingering, like something had been removed, but not entirely gone. I reached into my pocket and pressed my fingers against the folded rule sheet, just to feel it, just to confirm something was still stable. Because lying there in that room, staring at a corner that had been empty twice in the same way, I understood something I hadn't before. The rule hadn't made the figure disappear. It had just made it leave. And there was no part of that rule that said it couldn't come back. I didn't notice it right away. At first, it felt like the same kind of quiet as before. The room, the light, the steady hum. Everything held its place just enough to feel consistent. I sat on the bed, leaning slightly forward. I avoided looking at anything for too long. That seemed to help. The less I focused, the less things shifted, or at least, the less I noticed them shifting. Eventually, I picked up my phone. I hadn't checked it since the night before. Not because I didn't want to, just because it didn't feel useful anymore. Still, it was something familiar, something outside of the room. The screen lit up. 2:17. I stared at it for a second, then locked it and set it beside me. Time passed, or at least it felt like it did. I shifted slightly. The bed creaked softly. The sound felt normal, grounded. I reached for my phone again. 2:17. I frowned. That didn't make sense. I was sure more time had passed than that. Not a lot, but enough. I unlocked the screen. Waited. The numbers didn't change. I felt a small tension settle in my chest. Not panic, just doubt. I stood up slowly, stretched my legs, looked around the room. Everything was in place. I picked up the phone again. 2:19. I blinked. I hadn't seen it change. No transition, no movement between the numbers. Just one time, then another. I tried to recall what I had been doing between those two moments. Standing, looking around. Nothing else. But that didn't account for the gap. I exhaled slowly and set the phone back down. Maybe I had just missed it. That was possible. Easy, even. I sat back down, waited. A few minutes passed. I was sure of it this time. Long enough that I could feel the stillness settling again. Long enough to track my breathing, my thoughts, the small sounds in the room. I picked up the phone. 2:19. The same time. I stared at it. Waited. Nothing. Then, 2:22. It changed again, instantly, no visible progression. No seconds passing, just a jump. My grip tightened around the phone. I tried to think back. What had I done between 2:19 and 2:22? I couldn't answer. There was nothing there. No memory of those minutes, no sense of them passing, just absence. I set the phone down slowly, reached into my pocket, pulled out the rule sheet, unfolded it. My eyes moved straight to the line. If you notice a discrepancy between your memory and recorded time, trust the recorded time. Do not attempt to reconstruct missing intervals. I read it once, then again, slower. The wording didn't leave room for interpretation. Don't try to fill in the gap. Don't question it. Just accept what's recorded. I folded the paper again, more carefully this time, and held it in my hand. Because now, it wasn't theoretical anymore. It had already happened. I looked at the phone again. 2:23. This time, I watched it change. 2:24. The normal, steady, consistent. I kept my eyes on it for a full minute. No gaps, no jumps, just time moving the way it should. I exhaled quietly, set the phone down, waited again. A few minutes passed. I picked it up. 2:24, still the same. My chest tightened. I stared at the screen. Then, 2:27. Another jump. No transition. No warning. Just missing time. I didn't try to remember, didn't try to piece it together, because the rule was clear, and something about the way it was written made me believe that trying would make it worse. I placed the phone down, carefully, deliberately, like the movement itself mattered. Then I looked around the room. Everything was in place, exactly as it should be. But the feeling from earlier came back. Stronger now. That quiet sense that something had happened. And I hadn't been there to see it. I sat still, didn't move, didn't think too far ahead, because I understood something clearly now. Time wasn't passing incorrectly. I was. And whatever existed in those missing minutes was something I wasn't supposed to remember, or worse, something that had happened whether I noticed it or not. They came for me without knocking. The door opened quietly. A staff member stepped inside like he had been standing there the entire time. No sound before it, no warning, just presence. "Follow me," he said. I stood up immediately. My body felt normal. No heaviness, no fatigue. If anything, I felt sharper than before, more aware of small details I wouldn't have noticed earlier. That didn't feel like a good sign. I stepped into the hallway. At first, everything looked the same. Same lighting, same walls, same rows of identical doors stretching in both directions. But as we started walking, something felt off. Not wrong, just inconsistent. The spacing between doors didn't match. I would take a few steps expecting the next one to line up with a pattern. It wouldn't. It would be slightly closer, or slightly farther, enough to notice, not enough to confirm. I kept walking. We turned a corner, then another. I tried to track it, count steps, note direction, something to hold on to, but the rhythm didn't stay consistent long enough to follow. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Routine observation," he said. Same tone, same delivery. We continued. The hallway ahead stretched longer than the others, not dramatically. Just enough that the end felt slightly farther than it should have been. I focused on a door near the far wall, counted my steps as we approached. 1, 2, 3, 4. It didn't match. The distance felt longer than 4 steps should have covered. I said nothing. We kept moving. At some point, I glanced back. The hallway behind us looked the same, but not exactly. The door we had just passed felt farther away than it should have been. I slowed slightly. The staff member didn't. I adjusted my pace to keep up. "Is this the same hallway?" I asked. "Yes," he said. No hesitation. We reached the end and turned left. Another hallway. Identical. Same lighting. Same doors. But now it felt compressed, like the distance between everything had tightened. I glanced back again. The previous hallway looked shorter now. Much shorter. I stopped, just for a second. The staff member turned. "Continue," he said. I hesitated, then stepped forward. We walked a few more steps. That's when I saw it. A small mark on the wall, barely noticeable. A faint scuff near one of the doors. I hadn't seen it before. We passed it, turned another corner, and then, there it was again. Same mark, same position, same door. I slowed. This time, I was sure. We hadn't turned in a way that would bring us back. The layout hadn't matched, but the hallway had repeated. I looked at the staff member. He didn't react, didn't acknowledge anything, just kept walking. "Did we just pass this?" I asked. "No," he said. The answer came too quickly. I glanced back. The mark was still there, exactly where it had been. I turned forward. The hallway stretched ahead, longer now, subtly, unmistakably. I felt a quiet tension settle in my chest. Not panic, just awareness. We turned another corner, a different hallway. No mark, no repetition. I exhaled slightly. Maybe I had misjudged it. Maybe the layout was just similar enough to feel repetitive. That made sense. We walked a little further, then the mark. Again, same place, same wall. I stopped completely. "That's the same spot," I said. The staff member stopped too, turned slowly. "For your safety," he said, "continue forward." The words were the same as before, but the tone, it was different, more deliberate, like it mattered that I listened. I looked past him. The hallway ahead didn't feel stable anymore. Not shifting, just unreliable. Like distance itself wasn't holding the way it should. I glanced back one last time. The hallway behind us looked shorter, much shorter, short enough that it couldn't lead back to where we started. I turned forward. The staff member was still watching me, waiting. I nodded once, started walking. Because at that point, I understood something I hadn't before. It wasn't that the hallway was repeating. It was that it wasn't staying the same long enough for me to leave it. And if that was true, then I wasn't sure if I was moving forward at all. When they brought me back to the common area, something felt off immediately. Not obvious, just incomplete. The room looked the same as before. Same chairs, same table, same vending machine humming quietly against the wall. The lighting hadn't changed. The silence hadn't changed. but the balance was wrong. I stepped inside slowly. There were 3 people. I stopped, because I knew that wasn't right. Before, there had been more. 5, maybe 6. I couldn't remember exactly how many, but I knew it hadn't been this few. I stood there for a second, trying to recall faces, positions, voices, but the details didn't hold. Every time I tried to focus on them, something slipped, like I was trying to remember something I hadn't fully seen. "Sit," someone said quietly. I turned. One of the participants nodded toward an empty chair. I sat down, slowly, carefully. Across from me, the guy who used to scroll through his phone was still there. But he wasn't scrolling anymore. He was staring at the screen, completely still. His thumb hovered just above it, like he had been about to move but never finished. I watched him for a few seconds. Then his hand twitched, just slightly, then returned to the same position. A few seconds later, it happened again. Same motion, same timing, like something was repeating. And I looked away, focused on something else. To my left, another participant sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, hands pressed together tightly. He was whispering something. At first, I thought he was talking to himself, but the pattern didn't match. He said a few words, paused, then repeated them, exactly the same tone, same pacing. "Don't look, don't look, don't look," over and over, quiet, controlled, but constant. I straightened slightly, didn't engage, didn't respond, because I knew acknowledging it might change something. I glanced around again. 3 people, 3 chairs occupied, 1 empty. I stared at the empty space, trying to remember who had been there before. A face, a voice, anything. Nothing held. It was like that spot had always been empty. Except I knew it hadn't. "Guess you noticed it too," the guy next to me said quietly. I turned to him. "When?" I asked. He shrugged slightly. "Not sure." "You didn't see them leave?" "No." His voice was flat, not confused, not concerned, just stating it. "They were just gone." I looked back at the others. No one reacted. No one asked questions. The room had adjusted, instantly, like nothing had changed. "That happens?" I asked. He nodded once. "Yeah." I waited for more. There wasn't any. Across the room, the man who had been whispering stopped. For a moment, then started again. "Don't look." Same words, same tone. I exhaled slowly. The pressure behind my eyes returned. Faint, but present. I looked back at the empty chair. There were no belongings, no signs anyone had been sitting there at all. Just space, clean, unoccupied, like it had been prepared that way. "Do they tell you when someone leaves?" I asked. "No," he said. "Why not?" He hesitated. Then, "Because it's better if you don't think about it." That didn't sound official. It sounded like something he had decided on his own. I leaned back slightly, letting my eyes drift across the room without focusing on anyone directly, because the more I tried to remember, the less certain I became. Had there really been more people before, or had I just assumed there were? I closed my eyes for a second, tried to recall anything clearly. Nothing stayed, just fragments. I opened my eyes again. 3 people, 1 empty chair. That was all. And for some reason, what unsettled me most wasn't that someone was missing. It was that I couldn't prove they had ever been there at all. She wasn't supposed to say anything. That was obvious the moment it happened. Up until then, every interaction with the staff had followed the same pattern. Short, controlled, carefully limited. They answered questions just enough to move things forward, but never enough to explain anything. So when she broke that pattern, it stood out immediately. It was during another routine check. Same room, same chair, same quiet process. She moved between tasks without looking directly at me, adjusting the sensor on my finger, checking readings on the tablet, writing something down with that same precise, practiced motion. "Any new symptoms?" she asked. "No," I said. That part was automatic now. She nodded slightly, tapped something onto the screen. Then she paused, just for a second. Her hand hovered above the tablet, like she had stopped mid-action. I waited, didn't speak, didn't move. Then quietly, "You're starting to understand it," I frowned. "What?" She didn't respond immediately, just finished entering whatever she had been writing, set the tablet down, then spoke again, her voice lower this time, less controlled. "They don't test drugs here," she said. I felt my focus sharpen. "That's what they tell you, but that's not what this is." I leaned forward slightly. "Then what is it?" She hesitated. Not long, just enough to make it clear she wasn't supposed to answer. "They test thresholds," she said. The word felt out of place. "Thresholds of what?" This time she looked at me, only briefly. "Perception." The room felt quieter, not physically, just more contained. "That doesn't make sense," I said. It doesn't have to," she replied. Her tone wasn't dismissive, just certain. "They're measuring how much you can see before you stop functioning within it." I didn't respond right away, because that matched too closely with what I had already started to realize: the rules, the gaps, the way things didn't align. "What happens if you don't?" I asked. "If you don't what?" "Function within it." She picked up the tablet again, tapped something quickly. "Then you're no longer useful," she said. The way she said it wasn't threatening, just factual. "And what happens then?" She adjusted the sensor on my finger, slower this time. Then, quietly, "They remove you." The word settled heavily. Remove, not discharge, not release, just remove. "Where?" I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned in slightly, lowered her voice just enough that it wouldn't carry. "Listen carefully," she said. I did. "Once you notice certain things, you don't stop noticing them." Her eyes met mine for a moment longer this time. "That's the part they don't write down." I felt the pressure behind my eyes return, sharper now. "But the rules," I started. "Aren't there to stop it," she said, cutting me off. "They're there to slow it down." I went still. "Slow what down?" She straightened, picked the tablet back up. "Your awareness." The word lingered, like it was something measurable, something that could increase or exceed. She stepped back, and just like that, her tone changed. "Vitals are stable," she said, her voice returning to that same neutral rhythm. "Continue to follow all provided guidelines." Like the conversation hadn't happened. I didn't move, didn't respond. Because what she had just said, it didn't feel like information. It felt like a warning. She stepped toward the door, paused, just briefly, and without turning back, she added, "Most people don't realize they've gone too far until they can't ignore it anymore." Then she left. The door closed. The room returned to its quiet. Everything looked the same, felt the same. But the meaning behind it had changed. Because now I understood something clearly. This wasn't about side effects. It was about limits. And once you crossed them, there wasn't a way to go back to not knowing. It happened because I got comfortable, not completely, just enough to stop thinking about every movement. They moved me again. Another room, slightly different layout. There was a sink this time, and above it, a narrow mirror fixed to the wall. I noticed it immediately, not because it stood out, but because I remembered the rule. Do not rely on reflections. Limit exposure. Simple, easy to follow. I kept my eyes away from it as I stepped inside, focused on the chair instead. Routine checks again, blood pressure, pulse, same questions. Any new symptoms? No. Any difficulty following instructions? No. He nodded, noted something down, then stepped back. The door closed behind him. I was alone. The room felt stable. For now. I stayed seated for a while, looking straight ahead, letting my breathing settle, letting the quiet feel manageable. Then I stood, slowly, no reason not to. I walked toward the sink. Not because I needed to, just something to do. The mirror was there. I could feel it before I looked at it. That awareness of something reflecting more than it should. I stopped just short of it, kept my eyes low, hands resting on the edge of the sink. For a moment, I stayed like that, still. Then, without really deciding to, I looked up. It wasn't sudden, just a gradual shift until I was looking directly at my reflection. It looked normal, at first. Same face, same posture, same expression. I held the gaze, 1 second, 2, 3. Nothing changed. I almost relaxed. Then, something shifted. Not in the room, in the reflection. It stayed perfectly still, while I moved. I hadn't realized I had moved until I saw the difference. My reflection hadn't followed. It just watched me. I froze. The pressure behind my eyes surged. I kept staring. Couldn't look away fast enough. The reflection tilted its head slightly. A small movement. And delayed, but not matching mine. I stepped back. This time, it followed. Too late. Too slow. Like it was catching up. My breathing stayed controlled, but my focus sharpened. The rule. Do not look into reflective surfaces for longer than 5 seconds. I knew I had. I looked away, immediately, focused on the wall, on anything else. But the image stayed in my mind. Clear. Too clear. I waited. A few seconds, then a few more. The pressure didn't fade. It stayed, like something had settled into place. I glanced back at the mirror, carefully, just a quick look. The reflection matched now, perfectly. No delay, no difference, just normal. I stepped away from the sink, moved back to the chair, sat down, hands steady, breathing even. Everything looked fine. Everything felt controlled. But something had changed. And not in the room, in me, like a line had been crossed. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the rule sheet, unfolded it, read the line again. Do not look directly into reflective surfaces for longer than 5 seconds. I had broken it. There was no question. And the rule hadn't said what would happen if I did, just what not to do. I folded the paper slowly, put it back. Because for the first time since this started, I didn't know what the consequence was, only that it had already begun. It didn't get worse all at once. It just stopped correcting itself. That was the difference. Before, things would shift, slightly out of place, slightly delayed, but then they would settle, realign, return to something stable enough to ignore. Now, they didn't. I noticed it the next time they moved me. The hallway looked normal at first. Same lighting, same walls, same doors. But as I walked, something felt off, not wrong, just doubled. The staff member ahead of me moved at a steady pace, but for a brief moment, I saw him hesitate. Not physically, just a slight delay, like his movement had split into two versions that didn't quite match. I blinked. It didn't correct. Both versions remained. One slightly ahead, one slightly behind. Then they merged. I slowed slightly. He didn't react, didn't acknowledge anything, just kept walking. The walls felt different too. Not visually, just unstable, like their position wasn't fixed. I would glance at a door, then look away, and when I looked back, it felt like it had shifted slightly. Not enough to confirm, just enough to notice. We turned a corner. The hallway ahead stretched longer than expected, but this time, it didn't feel like a loop. It felt layered, like multiple versions of it were occupying the same space. One slightly ahead, one slightly behind, and I was seeing both. I swallowed slowly, kept my breathing steady. The pressure behind my eyes remained constant, not increasing, not fading, just present. We passed another door. For a moment, I saw it open. No sound, no movement, just the image of it slightly ajar. Then it was closed again. I didn't react, didn't turn, because I wasn't sure which version had been real, or if either of them were. The staff member stopped ahead of me, turned. "Continue," he said. I hadn't realized I had slowed. I nodded, stepped forward again. But now I was aware of it, fully. Everything felt slightly out of sync. Not enough to disrupt movement, but enough to make it unreliable. We reached another hallway. As I stepped into it, I felt a shift, like something had adjusted around me. The space felt thicker, harder to move through, not physically, just perceptually. I glanced at the wall. For a moment, I saw two surfaces, one solid, one slightly offset. Then they aligned. I looked forward. The staff member was still there, but for a split second, there were two of him, standing in the same place, facing the same direction. One slightly delayed. I blinked. One, back to normal. I exhaled quietly. This wasn't new anymore, just clearer, more defined. The rules hadn't stopped it. They had just slowed how quickly I noticed it. That was what she meant. Threshold. I was crossing it, gradually, without a clear point of return. We reached another door. He opened it, gestured for me to step inside, and the room looked normal. Bed, chair, table. But as I stepped in, I felt it again. That shift, stronger this time. Like the space wasn't settling around me properly. I looked at the table. For a moment, there were two positions. One slightly to the left, one slightly to the right. Then they merged. I stood still, letting my eyes adjust, letting my mind settle into it, because reacting didn't help anymore. The rules weren't designed for this level. They were for earlier stages, when things were still separate enough to manage. Now, they were overlapping. I sat down slowly on the bed, focused on something stable, my hands. They looked normal, but for a brief second, they didn't move at the same time. One shifted slightly before the other, then corrected. I exhaled slowly, because now I understood something clearly. It wasn't just the environment. It wasn't just the people. It was everything, all at once, layered, out of sync. And if that was true, then there wasn't a single version of reality I was experiencing anymore. There were multiple, and they weren't staying separate long enough for me to tell them apart. It happened in the hallway again, but this time it didn't feel like a distortion. It felt intentional. They were moving me to another room. Same process, same silence. The staff member walked ahead, steady and controlled, like nothing had changed. But everything had. The overlapping hadn't stopped. If anything, it had become more stable, more consistent, like my perception had adjusted to it instead of resisting it. We turned a corner. The hallway ahead stretched out longer than usual, empty, still. Then I saw it, at the far end. Someone standing there, facing me. I slowed. Not because I meant to, because something about it didn't align the way everything else did. It wasn't shifting. It wasn't doubling. It was fixed. The staff member kept walking, didn't react, didn't acknowledge it. That was the first sign. Like he couldn't see it at all. I stopped. Completely. The figure didn't move, didn't shift, just stood there, watching. The pressure behind my eyes increased, not sharply, just enough to bring everything into focus. I took a slow step forward, carefully. The figure didn't react. But as I got closer, I saw it clearly. My face. Not exactly, but close enough. Same posture, same stance, same stillness, just slightly off, like it wasn't fully aligned with me. My chest tightened. Not fear, recognition. The rule. It came back immediately. If you encounter yourself before entering a room, do not proceed. I stopped. Because just behind the figure, there was a door, partially open. The figure wasn't just standing there. It was standing in front of something, blocking it, or waiting. I stayed where I was, didn't move, didn't speak. The staff member had stopped ahead of me now, turned slightly, watching, but not saying anything. Like this part wasn't his role anymore. Like the decision was mine. I looked back at the figure, at myself. It hadn't moved, but something about it felt urgent, like it was holding something in place, or holding something back. I took a slow breath, stayed still. The figure tilted its head slightly, a small movement, enough to feel intentional, like it was reacting, trying to communicate. I didn't mirror it, didn't respond, just watched. Then it shifted, not toward me, not away, just slightly to the side, enough to reveal more of the door behind it. My focus tightened, because now I could see inside. Not clearly, just a glimpse, but enough. The room beyond the door didn't look stable, not like the others. The space felt wrong, more layered, more fractured, like multiple versions of it were trying to exist at the same time, and failing. I felt something pull at my attention, subtle, not physical, just focus, like something inside that room was drawing me in. The figure moved again, more urgently this time. Its hand lifted slightly, not pointing, not reaching, just warning. And then I understood. It wasn't blocking me. It was trying to stop me. My chest tightened. Because if that was true, then the rule wasn't just caution. It was protection. I stayed where I was, didn't move, didn't step forward. The figure held its position, still, unmoving. But now I could feel something else. Not from the hallway, from the room behind it. Something shifting, something unstable, something that didn't feel like it could stay contained. I took a slow step back, carefully. The figure didn't follow, didn't react. It just stayed there, watching. I took another step back, then another. The pressure behind my eyes eased slightly. The further I moved from the door, the less intense it felt. The staff member turned without a word, started walking in the opposite direction, like the moment had passed, like the decision had already been made. I followed, slowly. But before turning the corner, I looked back one last time. The figure was still there, standing in front of the door, exactly as before, watching, and for a brief moment, it looked relieved that I hadn't gone any further. I turned away, continued walking, but something stayed with me. because that was the first time something I had seen hadn't just been observing me. It had been trying to help. And that meant whatever was behind that door was something even I wasn't supposed to see. I didn't decide right away. That's what I keep telling myself, that I hesitated, that I thought it through. But the truth is, the decision had already been building long before I reached that point. Everything I had seen, the voice, the gaps in time, the reflection, the overlapping spaces, it all led somewhere. It didn't feel random. It felt like progression, like I was being shown something in stages, and the rules, they weren't stopping it. They were slowing it. That was what the nurse said. That was what I understood now. So when they brought me back to my room and the door closed behind me and the silence settled in again, I didn't sit down. I stood there, thinking, or maybe just noticing. The room shifted slightly. The table moved a fraction to the left, then back again. The bed didn't hold its position as firmly as it used to. Everything felt less fixed, more flexible, like it wasn't designed to stay in one version anymore. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the rules sheet, unfolded it, read through it again, slowly, carefully. Every line felt different now, not like instructions, like limitations. Each one designed to keep me within something stable, something manageable, something incomplete. I stopped at one line. If you become aware of a rule after violating it, do not attempt to correct your behavior retroactively. Continue forward. I had already done that more than once, which meant whatever boundary that rule was protecting, I had already crossed it. I folded the paper, held it in my hand for a moment, then set it down on the table, deliberately, like I was choosing not to rely on it anymore. The pressure behind my eyes increased slightly, not painfully, just enough to feel like something was responding. I turned toward the door. It looked normal, closed, still. But now I could see it differently, not just as an exit, as a separation between two versions of reality, one stable, one not, one limited, one complete. I walked toward it, slowly, carefully. The room shifted around me as I moved, not dramatically, just enough to remind me that it wasn't fixed anymore. I reached for the handle, paused, because I knew what this meant. Not leaving, not escaping, choosing. I tightened my grip, then turned it. The door opened. The hallway beyond wasn't stable. It didn't appear gradually. It layered into view. Multiple versions, slightly offset, all existing at once. I stepped through. The pressure surged immediately, stronger than before. Not painful, just overwhelming, like something had expanded too quickly. I stayed on my feet, barely, because movement didn't feel singular anymore. Each step split, then aligned, then split again. The walls shifted constantly, not settling, not stabilizing, just existing in multiple positions at once. I looked forward, then behind, then both at the same time. Not intentionally, just happening. I tried to think of the rules, tried to apply something, anything, but they didn't fit anymore. They were too limited, designed for isolated moments. This wasn't isolated. This was everything, every rule, broken at once, or maybe no longer relevant. I kept moving, or one version of me did. Another stayed still. I felt both. At the same time, my breathing didn't match itself. One inhale ahead of the other, then merging, then separating again. The voice returned, not from outside, not ahead, from everywhere. You crossed it. Same tone, same calm delivery, but no longer separate, not ahead, not behind, just present. I didn't respond, didn't try to, because I wasn't sure which version of me would. The space around me shifted again. The hallway stretched, collapsed, overlapped with itself. Doors appeared, disappeared, reappeared in different places. I saw the room, multiple versions of it, stacked, each slightly different, each equally real. I stepped toward one, or several. It didn't matter. They didn't stay separate long enough to choose. The pressure behind my eyes surged again, not painful, just infinite. Like there was no limit anymore, no threshold, no boundary. I stopped moving, or part of me did. The rest continued, each version slightly delayed, then aligned, then split again. And in that moment, I understood, not gradually, completely. The rules had never been about survival. They had been about delay, keeping me within a version of reality that didn't collapse into itself. And by stepping through that door, I hadn't just broken one rule. I had broken the only boundary that mattered. I stood there in a space that no longer held a single form, feeling everything at once, every version overlapping without separation. And for the first time, there was no stable point left to return to, no single version of reality that existed on its own, only all of them, together, at once. And I had chosen to see it. I don't remember leaving the facility the way I remember everything else. Not clearly. There isn't a single version of it that stays consistent long enough to follow from beginning to end. Just fragments, overlapping pieces that don't line up when I try to put them together. I remember moving. That part is certain. Not in a straight line, not through a fixed path, just movement, forward, sideways, through spaces that didn't stay the same long enough to understand. The building wasn't a building anymore. It didn't behave like one. Rooms existed on top of each other. Hallways crossed in ways that didn't make sense. Doors opened into multiple places at once. I stopped trying to choose. That was the only way to move. If I focused on one version, it shifted. If I tried to follow a single path, it split, so I didn't. I moved without selecting, letting the space resolve around me instead of forcing it into something stable. It worked. Or at least, it worked enough. The pressure behind my eyes didn't fade, but it stopped increasing, like it had reached a point where it didn't need to push any further. The voice didn't guide me, didn't warn me. It just existed, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes aligned with my own thoughts. "You're still moving." I didn't respond, didn't need to. The difference between thinking and answering didn't feel clear anymore. At some point, I reached a door, not like the others, not shifting, not layered, just there, stable, defined. It stood out immediately, not because it was different, but because it wasn't. Everything else had fractured. This hadn't. I stopped in front of it, watched it, waited for it to shift. It didn't. I reached for the handle, my hand aligned. One movement, one version. For a moment, everything held. I turned it. The door opened, and beyond it, there was no overlap, no delay, no second version, just a street, quiet, still, normal. I stepped through, and the shift was immediate. Everything collapsed into one. The pressure behind my eyes disappeared, completely. The air felt lighter, simpler, like something had been removed all at once. I stood there for a moment, looking at the road. Cars passed, people walked. Nothing overlapped, nothing shifted. Everything behaved the way it was supposed to. I took a step forward, then another. Each movement aligned perfectly. No delay, no duplication, just singular. I exhaled slowly, because I hadn't realized how much effort it had taken to exist in the other space, to maintain alignment, to move through something that didn't stay consistent. Now, there was nothing to manage, nothing to track, just reality. I turned slightly, looked back at the building. It looked different from the outside, not distorted, just ordinary. A plain structure. Dark windows, no sign, no indication of what was inside. For a moment, I wondered if it had always looked like that, or if I had just never seen it clearly before. I looked at the door, closed, still, solid, no variation, no layering. I stepped away from it, further down the street, blending into the movement around me. People passed without noticing me, without reacting. Everything felt normal, completely. But as I walked, something stayed with me. Not pressure, not distortion, just awareness. I caught my reflection in a window, my movement aligned perfectly. No delay, no second version, just me. I kept walking, didn't stop, because even though everything appeared stable, felt stable, there was something I couldn't ignore, something subtle, something easy to miss. The world hadn't changed, not visibly, not obviously, but I had. And as I moved through a space that no longer overlapped, no longer shifted, no longer revealed anything beyond itself, I realized something quietly. It wasn't that I had escaped. It was that I had entered a version of reality that didn't show me everything anymore. And somehow, that felt worse. For a few days, I tried to convince myself it was over, that whatever had happened inside that facility had stayed there, that stepping outside into something stable, consistent, normal, meant I had left it behind. At first, it worked. I went back to my apartment, paid what I owed, bought groceries, did small, ordinary things that didn't require much thought. The kind of routine that keeps everything grounded. Nothing shifted, nothing overlapped, no voices, no figures, just normal. But the absence didn't feel like relief. It felt like something had been removed. Not violently, just quietly. Like a layer had been taken away without me noticing when it happened. I tried not to think about it. Told myself that's what recovery felt like. That whatever the drug had done was fading. That this was just my mind returning to baseline. That made sense. It should have been that. But the feeling didn't fade. It stayed. Subtle. Persistent. Like something just outside my awareness. I started noticing small things. Not distortions. Not the same as before. Just gaps. Moments where my attention would shift slightly, and something felt incomplete. Like I had missed something that used to be there. Not lost. Just no longer accessible. I ignored it, at first, because there was nothing to prove. Nothing I could point to and say something was wrong. Everything looked fine, felt fine, but the feeling stayed. One night, I sat at the table in my apartment, staring at nothing in particular. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet I used to want, simple, predictable. But now, it felt thin, like it didn't hold as much as it should. I reached into my pocket without thinking. The rules sheet. I hadn't thrown it away, didn't know why. I unfolded it slowly, read through it again. The words felt different now, not strange, not confusing, just incomplete. Because now I understood what they really were. They weren't instructions for survival. They were instructions for limitation. Each rule controlled how much I could perceive at any given moment, how much I was allowed to notice without losing alignment. That was the purpose. Not to protect me from what was happening, but to keep me within a version of reality where I could still function. I leaned back slightly, letting that settle. Because once I understood that, everything else made sense. The voice, the time gaps, the reflections, the figure in the room. They weren't separate events. They were layers, and the rules were filters, temporary ones, designed to slow how quickly those layers became visible. I looked around my apartment. Everything looked stable, but that didn't mean it was. It just meant I couldn't see the rest of it anymore. That was the difference. The drug hadn't created anything. It had removed something, a filter. And now, that filter was back, or partially, enough to keep everything looking normal, but not enough to make me forget what was underneath. I folded the paper slowly, carefully, because now it didn't feel like something I needed to follow. It felt like something I had already moved beyond. The people who were removed, they hadn't been taken because something happened to them. They were taken because they stopped fitting into a single version of reality. They saw too much, understood too much, became something that couldn't align anymore. I sat there in my apartment, staring at a space that looked completely normal, completely stable, and realized something I couldn't ignore. I hadn't escaped. I had just been reduced, placed back into a version of reality that limited what I could see, what I could understand, what I could notice. And the rules, they weren't meant for people like me anymore. Because once you understand what they actually are, you're no longer the kind of subject they were designed to contain. It started again a week later. Not all at once. Just a small shift, subtle enough that I almost ignored it. I was sitting in my apartment late at night. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet I used to find comforting. The fan hummed softly, steady and predictable. Nothing moved unless I moved it. Everything felt normal, or close enough. I had stopped thinking about the facility as much, not completely, but enough that it didn't sit at the front of my mind anymore. It had become something distant, something I could push aside if I needed to. That's what I told myself. Then I heard it, my name, soft, clear, from somewhere behind me. I didn't move, didn't react. For a second, I thought it was my phone, a notification, a voice from a video I forgot to close, something explainable. I stayed still, waited. A few seconds passed, nothing followed. I exhaled slowly. Then, my name again, same voice, same tone, but this time, it didn't feel external. It felt aligned, like it came from the same place my thoughts did. My focus tightened, because I remembered the rule. If you hear your name called twice, do not respond to the second instance. I didn't. I sat there, staring forward, letting the silence settle again. My breathing stayed steady, controlled. The room didn't change, no shifting, no overlap, just quiet. I almost convinced myself that was it, that whatever this was, it had already ended. Then, a third time, my name, identical. No delay, no distortion, perfectly matched. I felt my chest tighten slightly, because now there was no difference, no way to tell. The first voice, the second, the third, they all sounded the same. I didn't move, didn't respond, didn't turn, because I didn't know which one was mine. A few seconds passed, then I realized something, not suddenly, just quietly. The thought formed before I could stop it, or maybe it had already been there, waiting. The voice spoke again, calm, even. You heard it. I stayed still. Didn't respond, because I couldn't tell if that had been me thinking it, or something else saying it first. The room stayed unchanged, perfectly stable, completely normal. But the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied. I stared at the wall in front of me, focused on something solid, something that didn't move. But the thought stayed, unresolved. Because the rule had always been simple: ignore the second voice. But now, there wasn't a second voice. There were multiple, all identical, all aligned. And for the first time, I couldn't tell which one I was supposed to ignore, or which one was actually me.